Please, call 911. I don't have my phone with me. My daughter, who seemed like a completely different person, appeared in front of us late at night in a heavy storm, holding my unconscious grandchild. I was stunned by the unexpected situation, but realizing it was serious, I quickly snapped out of it and tried to call 911 like my daughter asked. My husband, however, got furious at the sight of our daughter. "We're not calling the cops," and stormed off. Looking at my daughter, I noticed her belly was large. She seemed to be pregnant, but her body was extremely thin. I wondered if she hadn't been eating properly. My grandchild didn't look well either, and calling 911 felt too drastic. In hindsight, I wish I had forced myself to go see my daughter earlier. Every time I called, her husband refused to let me talk to her, saying, "She doesn't want to speak to you." I regret believing his words. What could have happened to my daughter? We could never forgive our daughter's husband for what he did to our precious girl. My husband and I are both in our 50s, and we have a daughter. My husband makes a living creating traditional crafts, and right now, we are facing an heir issue. Just a few years ago, we had a promising heir, no worries in life, and a happy family. But after our daughter got married, all that disappeared. How did things end up like this? My husband and I met because I had an interest in traditional crafts and visited his father's workshop. My father-in-law had set up a small workshop space where he hoped to introduce traditional crafts to younger generations and train as many apprentices as possible. My husband was helping out there, and when I eagerly asked many questions, he invited me to his father's exhibition, giving me a ticket. At the exhibition, he explained everything to me one by one. And that's how we started dating and eventually got married. I didn't have the talent to create art like my husband, but after seeing so much, I became quite good at discerning quality and was able to assist him in his work. Now, as a couple, we work side by side, dedicating ourselves to advancing traditional crafts. When we got married, my father-in-law passed all his rights to my husband and stepped back to focus on training the younger generation. My husband took over for my father-in-law, but there was no guarantee that someone would follow in my husband's footsteps, so my father-in-law felt it was important to nurture future successors. Then our daughter was born, and she loved her father's work, spending more and more time at the workshop. When she started mimicking what she saw, my husband seemed to recognize some talent in her. Even as a child, our daughter would say, "I'm going to take over for Dad." So my husband believed her. In fact, I think he was thrilled. I knew my husband had chosen to be both her father and her master, and he trained her strictly. Seeing this, my father-in-law seemed to feel at ease, and then he passed away suddenly. It happened so fast, without even a chance to say goodbye. But my husband said he was grateful his father passed away peacefully in his sleep, and I agreed. My father-in-law had trained many apprentices, but my husband didn't take them on. He poured all his skills into our daughter, intending to make her his sole successor. After middle school, our daughter said she wanted to officially apprentice under my husband. I begged her to at least graduate from high school, and she reluctantly agreed. But now, I wonder if that decision drastically and negatively changed her life. One of my biggest regrets is pushing her to go to high school. It may have been my first major mistake. Though she was reluctant at first, once she started high school, it seemed to me like she was enjoying it just like any other student. "Mom, you convinced me to go to high school, and I'm so glad you did. I'm really enjoying it. Thank you for making me go." At the time, her words made me think I'd made the right choice, but now I wonder if she was just pretending to be happy. I came to realize this later on. After graduating from high school, my daughter didn't go to college. Instead, she helped in the workshop while working for a local company. My husband focused on creating his works and didn't set up workshops like his father, so my help was enough. With my husband's advice that knowing the world is important for craftsmanship, our daughter worked a regular job while helping him on weekends. Her skills advanced to the point where she was nearly on par with my husband, and she became known as the next successor. Some investors, hoping to support her growth, began buying her pieces even though they weren't for sale. My husband and I felt relieved that the workshop was secure. 10 years after our daughter graduated from high school, she attended a class reunion where more than half of her old classmates gathered, as they had promised. When she found out some of her classmates were married and already had children, her high school boyfriend started proposing to her. She seemed to feel pressured by the fact that others were ahead of her, but she had her own goals and repeatedly turned down the proposals. Still, he persistently proposed. Eventually, she gave in, and they got married. It seems she had set a few conditions. She wanted to train and help at my husband's workshop 2 days a week. She didn't want to have children for a while, and eventually, she wanted to take over the workshop. Her boyfriend agreed to these without fully understanding them because he just wanted to marry her. But as the wedding plans progressed, those conditions were gradually brushed aside. In the end, her working at the workshop was fine, but him saying, "I won't accept her as the heir. Why should her family come first when she's marrying into mine?" became an issue. Apparently, that's what he told her. Considering her boyfriend's pride, our daughter had no choice but to give up on becoming the heir. He told her, "I'll agree to anything else, just not you becoming the heir." After being with him for so long, she felt she had no choice but to accept. Since she and her boyfriend had been together for so long, his parents had always treated her well. I think our daughter felt she couldn't just prioritize her own family's wishes. We were deeply heartbroken by her decision. But our daughter has her own path in life, and as parents, we couldn't deny that. Above all, she was becoming independent and starting her own family. It should have been something to celebrate. Rather than trying to persuade our daughter or her in-laws, we chose to respect her decision and celebrate her new beginning. This left my husband, who had never taken on any apprentices before, scrambling to find one. Over the years, several people had asked my husband to train them, but he always turned them down because he relied on our daughter. Now, no one was willing to lend a hand. However, someone who my father-in-law had helped stepped forward to offer assistance. After my father-in-law passed, he had been studying on his own, but he came to us saying he wanted to learn from my husband. Since he wasn't a complete stranger to us, everything moved smoothly, and my husband took him on as a potential successor. With the heir issue resolved, my husband began teaching his apprentice everything, just as strictly as he had taught our daughter. Our daughter often contacted us, telling us how well her newlywed life was going. Since her husband was an only child, I was worried they might have to live with his parents right away. But thanks to her in-laws, they settled in a new home conveniently located between both families. She looked forward to helping at the workshop twice a week, and every time she came home, she seemed extra enthusiastic. Her relationship with her husband's family was great, and although I was once shocked by her marriage, those feelings felt foolish in light of the peaceful days we were having. That is, until we heard the news that her husband was being transferred out of town. It was such an unexpected announcement. Could they really transfer him after less than 6 months of marriage? I started to wonder if he already knew about the transfer, rushed the marriage without listening to her, and then later said, being the heir is impossible, once things were too far along. I asked if it wasn't possible for him to go alone on a temporary assignment. Apparently, my daughter also asked, but he told her he couldn't manage without her. My daughter smiled and said that being needed by someone is a wonderful thing, and that's why she decided to go with him. My husband and I had no choice but to support her. 6 months after she followed her husband on his transfer, we found out that they gave birth. Apparently, they had known about the pregnancy before the move, but her husband suggested waiting until things settled down or until after the baby was born to surprise us. In reality, I think they were just struggling to adapt to the whirlwind of changes. He may also have feared that if we knew she was pregnant, we would insist on a solo transfer. No matter what, my husband and I couldn't shake the uneasiness we felt about our daughter's husband. Still, he was the man our daughter chose, the one who was eager to be with her, so it felt wrong to criticize him based on our own assumptions. More than anything, his parents were wonderful, reasonable people. A son raised by such kind, sensible people couldn't possibly be the sole problem. We tried to believe that, but even with the joy of our first grandchild, the heaviness in our hearts only grew stronger by the day. Living far away and raising a child in an unfamiliar place. I understood why she couldn't contact us as often, but the gaps between calls grew longer and longer. When we tried calling her, her husband always answered, saying she was too busy with the baby, and that he'd pass on the message instead of letting us speak with her. Couldn't he take care of the baby while she handled the call? I couldn't help but wonder this every time we were given that excuse. I almost blurted it out a few times. Once, after calling several days in a row, he told me not to call anymore because the ringtone upset the baby. But if the baby was really crying, shouldn't I have been able to hear it through the receiver? I never did. About a year after this began, my husband had a work trip to the city where our daughter lived, so I decided to go with him. I had a few things I wanted to give to her and some things I wanted to say in person. My husband agreed to visit their home too, so we decided to go after he finished his work. We had called ahead, but no one answered, so we left a message on the voicemail. Since we didn't get a call back, we visited our daughter and her husband at the agreed time. When we rang the doorbell, it was her husband who answered. For a moment, I felt something was off. I think my face said that too. After all, we told them we were coming at this time. How could my daughter not be the one to greet us? The daughter I knew would be eagerly waiting outside with the baby in her arms as the time approached. Her husband glanced at both of us, then sighed in frustration before saying, "Your daughter doesn't want to see you. I told her to tell you over the phone, but she said she doesn't even want to hear your voice. She told me you put her through horrible training. Just hearing about it makes me mad. She said you stole her youth. He also said she felt she couldn't say no or you'd kick her out, and that she never felt loved by her parents. My husband and I were strict when it came to training her in the craft. We believed that's what it meant to carry on tradition. But we never intended to force her, and learning she felt so scared that she thought we'd kick her out if she refused was shocking." My husband stood beside me, his face pale. We held back any words we had for our daughter and left without giving her the things we had brought. After that, we stopped reaching out to her altogether. We also stopped communicating with her in-laws, and all we could do was pray for our daughter's happiness every day. This went on for about 3 years. The weather forecast predicted a storm, so we spent the day preparing for it. My husband was rushing to ship out his finished products in the truck, so everything that day was hectic and ahead of schedule. As a result, we ended up going to bed earlier than usual that night. In the middle of the night, the persistent sound of the doorbell woke us up. "Who could it be at this hour?" my husband muttered in frustration as he went to answer. He told me to stay in bed, but I argued that anyone visiting at this hour must have a reason, and someone should be ready to call the police if needed. I grabbed the phone and followed behind him as we headed to the door. The doorbell rang again. My husband, cautious, asked in a low voice, "Who is it?" A familiar, long-missed voice responded, "Dad?" "It's me." How could I ever forget the voice of the daughter we had lovingly raised for 28 years? "Honey, that's her. That's our daughter's voice." In the middle of a downpour, and at such an hour, why would our daughter be here? I had a bad feeling, but I was so happy that our estranged daughter had come that I immediately opened the door. A figure that looked like my daughter quickly slipped inside. "Please, call 911. I don't have my phone, and there's no payphone nearby." She said this in a desperate voice. There used to be plenty of payphones around here, but after the last one was removed from the station, they all disappeared. She could have easily called 911 if there had been a payphone, even without her phone. I only thought about this later. At that moment, hearing "call 911" from my daughter's vacant eyes left me in shock, and my mind went blank. "We're not calling 911. Wipe her off with a towel and come to the garage." His strong voice brought me back to my senses. In my daughter's arms was our 4-year-old grandson, limp and lifeless. I also noticed my daughter's belly was large, she must have been close to her due date. I took my grandson from her and wrapped him in a blanket. He was so limp he looked like he wasn't breathing, but he was, just barely. I knew that if we kept him warm and got him to the hospital quickly, we could still save him. My husband must have been getting the car ready to take them to the hospital. I hurried to the garage with my grandson in my arms, but when I turned back, my daughter was just standing there, not moving. Although her belly looked full-term, my daughter was far too thin for a woman that close to delivery. "Honey, our daughter." My husband, who was in the driver's seat, responded to my words. He told me to get in the car and wait, then went back to our daughter, pulling her by the arm. "Your mom and I are going to save you. So hang in there for the baby's sake." Our daughter, who had been slumping weakly, lifted her head and managed to walk on her own. But she was so weak that she couldn't move without my husband pulling her along. Once our daughter was in the car, my husband drove at high speed, navigating through the downpour with impressive skill, and safely got our daughter and grandson to the only hospital in town. From the car, I had already called ahead to inform them of our arrival and our daughter and grandson's condition, so they were prepared for us. When we arrived, several nurses were waiting with stretchers. One took my grandson from my arms, while two others helped my pregnant daughter onto a stretcher and rushed them both to the treatment room. My daughter hadn't been eating, and her malnourished state had clouded her judgment. I think that's why she kept muttering, "Call 911, over and over, believing it was the one thing she had to communicate. That's why, "Call 911, was the first thing she said when she saw us. We had thought she was doing fine. We had prayed every day for her happiness. We had believed that her late grandfather was watching over and protecting her. What a terrible mother I am, to have left it at just believing everything was okay. Even if they disliked me or rejected me, I should have gone to my daughter and her husband's house again and again. I kept blaming myself, thinking I was a foolish mother who had made the wrong choices over and over." The doctor who treated our daughter explained that both she and her unborn child were severely malnourished. My grandson had lost consciousness due to hunger, but the doctor said he would be fine once he got proper nutrition. My daughter's condition was a bit more severe than my grandson's, but miraculously, her baby was unharmed. The doctor told us that our daughter had fought hard, and my husband and I cried on the spot. In addition to malnutrition, she was also suffering from extreme sleep deprivation. The doctor didn't pry into her home situation, but offered to write a medical report if needed. Thankfully, the doctor assured us there were no lasting physical marks, which was a relief. She may have been staying awake at night, fearing something would happen while she slept, to protect her baby and her son. What kind of terrible treatment would force her to go to such lengths? Someone had done something unimaginable to her. Once she regained consciousness, we would learn the truth. I thought about going home to get clothes and other necessities for my daughter and grandson during their hospital stay, but I couldn't bear the thought of not being there when my daughter woke up, so I spent the night in the hospital room. The torrential rain from the night before seemed like a lie as the morning sun streamed through the hospital room curtains, filling the room with a warm, comforting light. Almost as if guided by that light, our daughter regained consciousness. We rejoiced that both our daughter and grandson were safe, and for the first time in years, we had a real conversation. It wasn't just reports or someone relaying messages, hearing words directly from her was what made us happy. Things as simple as, "How have you been?" or, "Sorry I couldn't get in touch." Even those small words were enough to fill us with joy. Once we finished catching up, there was a moment of silence. While she had been sleeping, my husband and I had agreed not to pressure her into talking about anything she didn't want to. We had heard that some people take time to open up about their experiences, especially victims. Our daughter looked between us and took a deep breath. "Dad, Mom, I need to tell you both something. It's going to be long, but can you listen without asking questions until I'm done?" Her eyes had the look she always had when she made up her mind. The same look she had when she decided to become the successor to the family craft, when she chose to get married, and when she decided to move with her husband for his job transfer. We nodded silently. According to her, she thought she knew all of her husband's good and bad sides, having been together for so long, but that wasn't the case. After they got married, he appeared understanding on the surface, but whenever something happened, he would make demands in exchange for forgiveness. For example, if she made plans to have lunch with friends. If she upset her husband the day before, he would tell her, "Cancel tomorrow's lunch, and I'll forgive you." Little by little, he isolated her from her friends. After his transfer took them away from their hometown, he started distancing her from both of their families as well. Once our grandson was born, he used the child as leverage to make more demands. To protect her child, our daughter felt she had no choice but to comply with him. Before she knew it, she wasn't allowed to leave the house, and she had to be cheerful just to keep him in a good mood. He treated her like a pet, sometimes showering her with affection, other times punishing her harshly in the name of discipline. One of his cruel punishments was restricting her food. She had to share a single slice of bread each day with her son. After she got pregnant again, even her son understood there was a baby in her belly. Some days, even though our daughter told him to eat her share, he insisted that she eat for the baby's sake and refused to eat himself. When her husband went on business trips, he would leave no extra food, and she sometimes had to survive on just water. I reached my limit. I wanted to at least send the kids to you so they could eat properly, but when he was away, he was so afraid I'd run that he locked the doors and even tied me down. He would wrap towels around her wrists and ankles to avoid leaving marks, consciously trying to hide what he was doing. The only reason she managed to escape this time was because an unexpected call came, and he didn't have enough time to lock everything up properly. The padlock on the door wasn't fully secured, and he didn't have time to tie us up. I thought we could escape, but the kids were unconscious, and he had taken my phone. She didn't have any cash, but then she remembered she still had her transit card. She had quit her job when they got married, but she hadn't returned her transit card. He must have thought it was useless without money on it, so he didn't take it from her. She was worried about the balance but didn't remember disabling the auto recharge feature. Her credit card had been taken, but she had heard that it's difficult for anyone but the cardholder to cancel it. Since no one had asked her to write a power of attorney, she figured the card should still be usable despite it being taken away. My daughter and grandson jumped on the last train and came straight to us for help. But by then, she had reached her limit and could only keep repeating the one thing she felt she had to say: call 911. Saying, call 911, was clearer than repeating our phone number or trying to call us, but if her husband found out through the police, it would all be for nothing. It was a very dangerous gamble. It's okay. I'm your daughter, aren't I? A mother doesn't collapse before making sure her children are safe, right? When she finished, my husband, who had been quiet until now, suddenly exploded, shouting loud enough to be heard outside the hospital room, "Call the police. I'll sue him." I wasn't far behind him, yelling, "I'll go there myself and drag him to the police." A nurse came in saying, "I understand you're upset, but please keep it down inside the hospital," and told us to calm down. My husband and I went to the police, told them everything, and filed a complaint. We explained that our daughter wasn't well enough to get up yet, so a female officer offered to come to the hospital room, and we accepted. After the report was filed, the police, who had been on standby, went to her house, but her husband wasn't there. However, there were signs that he had returned home at some point. He's probably panicking because the two he'd locked up are gone, or he thinks he's been exposed and is on the run. The police warned us that there was a strong chance he'd show up in front of our daughter and grandson, so we should be careful. They also promised to patrol the area regularly. They suggested it would be safer to stay in the hospital, and my husband wanted to stay with me, but I insisted we go home because I feared a confrontation between him and our daughter's husband could be dangerous. Days passed without any sign of him, and our daughter and grandson recovered enough to be discharged. The doctors advised rest at home to regain their strength, so we took on the responsibility of nursing them back to health. There was no way we could send them back to the house where her husband might return. We had the police increase patrols around our home, which gave us some peace of mind. One night, when we had just begun to let our guard down a little, I woke up to a noise coming from somewhere. I glanced at the clock, it was just after 2 a.m. The sound wasn't coming from the front door. My husband told me to stay with our daughter and grandson while he went to check it out alone. Although our home was separate from the workshop, we had converted an unused room into a workspace where my husband could work from home. It seemed like someone had broken in through that space. When my husband gets focused, he can sometimes be a little careless. But ever since what happened with our daughter and grandson, he had been much more cautious. If someone had broken in through the workspace, there were tools there that, if used wrongly, could hurt someone. I thought, if something happens to my husband, maybe I should call 911 before waiting for him to check, and just as I was about to dial, there was a huge noise. Later, my husband told me what had happened. As he was feeling his way through the dark, his flashlight suddenly illuminated a figure. Realizing he had come face to face with the intruder, he backed away, but the man was in a blind rage. The man kept repeating our daughter and grandson's names, and that's when my husband realized it was her husband. He hadn't recognized him at first because he looked so different from the man we once knew. Her husband ranted, "I love her so much, but all she talks about is her parents and that stupid craft. Once the kid came along, everything was about him, and she doesn't even look at me anymore. I'm the one providing for her. I'm the one who loves her. This was my way of teaching her that." He yelled, "Take responsibility for raising an ungrateful woman who would run away from me." When he tried to attack my husband, fearing for his life, grabbed something nearby and threw it. Unfortunately or luckily, it struck her husband's hand. The object he threw was one of his tools, a chisel. Even though her husband was in the wrong, my husband felt guilty about injuring him and tried to help, but he screamed in pain and started thrashing around, making it impossible. When I heard that scream, I knew I couldn't wait for my husband's instructions any longer and called the police. Fortunately, there was a patrol officer nearby, so they sent him over immediately. Within minutes, the officer arrived and restrained my daughter's husband, who was writhing around in the workshop. Ignoring his complaints about the pain, the officer took him away. Later, her husband was formally arrested. A search of their house revealed some pretty disturbing items. Specifically, a wide variety of restraint devices. He had been infatuated with her ever since high school. After over a decade, he finally married her, thinking she was now his alone. But all she ever talked about was her family and the craft, which bored him. He wanted to retrain her to only focus on him, praise him, and devote herself to him. He figured the best way to do that was to cut off her relationships with friends, and he was in the middle of doing just that. He hated us for getting in the way of his plans, so he broke into our home to take revenge. He thought that if he could destroy us right in front of her, she would finally give up. He was rearrested on multiple charges, including unlawful confinement and attempted murder. There was no sympathy for him, and he was sentenced to prison, just as the prosecution had requested. I've heard that even those sentenced to life imprisonment sometimes get out, but for someone as severely lacking in humanity as him, I doubt it. It was confirmed that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. My daughter overcame her hardships and safely gave birth to her second child. She laughed lightly, saying, "The first birth was so difficult, but this one came out so easily. I had no idea her first delivery had been so hard. She must have suffered so much and wanted someone to lean on. I regretted not being there for her during that time." My daughter said, "It's not your fault, I didn't tell you, but still, I deeply wished I had been there for her." After their son's arrest, his parents came to apologize. They deeply apologized for knowing about his violent tendencies and obsessive nature since childhood but failing to get him help, and for allowing him to marry my daughter. They claimed they didn't realize things were so bad, since he had been fine as long as they kept him happy. They never imagined he was doing anything deserving of a prison sentence. It's true that parents don't always know what their children are doing when they're not around. Parents don't know everything about their children. So I can understand where they're coming from, but if the roles were reversed, could I accept that same excuse? I asked them again to clarify. They acknowledged that it was unacceptable and promised to pay a large settlement, well above the usual amount, including damages and child support for both of our grandchildren. Once her husband's sentence was finalized, his parents paid the agreed amount in full. The divorce was also finalized, so my daughter and grandchildren were finally freed from his control. Our grandchildren recovered relatively quickly, but my daughter, having just given birth, took a little longer to fully heal. Now she's living with us, raising her children and working on her craft, with our full support. She has high hopes of holding her first solo exhibition by the time her second child is a bit older. She looks more radiant and happy than she's ever been in her life.